Today I'm going to be ranking the movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the MCU. Just to give you a rundown of the way that I will be ranking these, I will be ranking them on how well made they are, as well as how much I enjoyed the movie. So, in other words, I'll try and use an objective standard for judging the movies, whilst also commentating on whether or not I enjoyed the movie, and that's obviously subjective. If you disagree with my ranking or notice that I've missed out relevant information when making the points on any of the movies, and let me know in the comments. Remember, by exchanging dialogue, there's a good chance you'll learn something new or broaden your understanding on a topic. Alright then, without further ado, let's get into the ranking. So, number 1, we have Iron Man. Iron Man is a solid entry into the MCU. It has a strong narrative, a flawed character suffers and is redeemed. Tony Stark's character is very strong throughout the entire movie. This was obviously very early days for the MCU as the beginning of it. And Robert Downey Jr. plays Iron Man so well that even after the second Iron Man, for me personally, I was really engaged with his character. And it's still, especially to this day, it stands the test of time, and it's a strong entry into the MCU. It's a good movie overall. So I'm going to be ranking that in A tier. Coming up next is The Incredible Hulk, and this is one of the outcasts kind of the MCU. It's one of the movies that people actually forget is actually part of the MCU. It's canonical. It's an okay movie. It's not. Some people say it's really bad. I wouldn't say that. It's okay. It's mediocre. The plot's inconsistent at times, but that is partly due to, I heard there were several reshoots throughout the sequence of filming, and reshoots when it comes to movies, and I'm sure, as we'll see with the Marvels movie, that's been delayed 4 times, hasn't it? It's had reshoots. The movie is impacted as a result of that. So, Incredible Hulk for me, we're going to put it in C tier. Iron Man 2. I was not a fan of this sequel to Iron Man. Obviously, after Iron Man, I had really high hopes about the next entry, and it disappointed for the most part. It needed more time to refine the script. I think they rushed the movie production-wise. It's a great cast, it's a brilliant cast, but there's just no narrative focus throughout the entire movie, and the villain, Whiplash, I think, he's really not that interesting as a villain. So I'm going to rank this in D. 4. So this is the entry for another major character in the MCU. It's a weaker character entry than Iron Man, that's for sure. The tonal shift to comedy in the Earth subplot feels off because they're trying to establish this character, but it also feels like one of those road trip kind of comedies almost. The character arc's clear, but it breaks apart at times. And with Thor, obviously this was before Taika Waititi took over directing the Thor movies, and Thor became more Chris Hemsworth than Thor, moving away from his comic book counterpart to a more comedic tone. But I think when establishing the character of Thor, a serious tone needs to be upheld, especially in this movie. I will rank this one again C. I would say above The Incredible Hulk. Captain America 1. It's a great first act. The Captain America trilogy, by the way, is brilliant. We'll get onto that later. It's a great first act, first entry for Steve Rogers' character. The first act in the movie is brilliant. The character arc's great. The Red Skull plot is actually probably one of the weaker parts of the movie, and this is what stops this first Captain America from being as good as Iron Man. The first Captain America will be going in the B tier, but it's a higher B tier. And now we come to the end of Phase 1, so the Avengers movie. It's a great end to Phase 1. This movie established the successful superhero team-up formula. It wasn't the first, but it was the first one that was showcased really well. The dialogue is balanced well, there's a clear plot, and I really enjoyed it. This is going in A tier for me, above Iron Man. It's one of the top A tier movies. Now we go to, I think this is the first movie in Phase 2, Iron Man 3. It's an improvement on Iron Man 2, but there was a continuity confusion throughout this movie. I think it was due to first of all, the retconning of the Mandarin, because obviously now we're Phase 4 and what they did in Shang-Chi with the Mandarin's character, and there's some filler series content in between that period of time which showed his character more, but the retconning of Mandarin in this movie, and also Tony Stark's character, which I believe was due to the impression that Iron Man's arc would have been complete in this movie. They weren't necessarily planning, they had thoughts, but they had a concrete plan of Iron Man's character throughout the remaining of the MCU. Because of that, the movie didn't stand the test of time compared to the first one, and I'm going to be ranking it again above The Incredible Hulk. But I believe The Incredible Hulk is probably going to be one of the lower C tier movies. Thor 2, Thor: The Dark World. Commonly accepted amongst quite a large portion of the Marvel fandom as the worst movie in the MCU. I wouldn't say that, especially in recent times. But it's not a good movie. It's mediocre. It's just mediocrity at its finest. It's boring storyline, forgettable villain, arguably the most forgettable Malekith, I think, played by Christopher Eccleston. There's no real engaging moments in the movie in either characters or story, and because of that, I feel there's just no substance to this movie overall. And I also felt nothing throughout by watching the movie, but that's less important. It is going to go below Iron Man 2. Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This is our first S tier movie, arguably the strongest movie in terms of plot continuity. It's a very strong, concrete movie within the MCU, plot-wise, action-wise. It's nice to go back now, especially now, and watch The Winter Soldier, because now everything's multiversal. Everything has to be a multiversal threat. You can't have like a simple, like concise storyline, Earth-based storyline anymore. But this movie is a perfect example of how you can keep the scale of things lower, not low, but respectively lower than what we have now, while still having an amazing movie. It's S tier for me. Some people say it's the best movie in the MCU. There's definitely an argument there. And now we have Guardians of the Galaxy. This is pushing close to S tier. James Gunn, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. First of all, taking low tier comic book characters. People forget that in terms of Marvel as an IP, as a brand, the Avengers aren't like. When you think of Marvel, you think of the Avengers, but that's because of what the MCU has done. Marvel, S tier in Marvel, so while in DC you have your Batmans and Supermans, Marvel it's Spider-Man and the X-Men. The Avengers are B-list characters. The Guardians are C-list. But for James Gunn to take these comic book characters that are low tier, craft their arcs in a way that we feel more investment and love for them than some previously established characters, some of the bigger names in Marvel. It's a great movie, top of A tier. Up next is Avengers: Age of Ultron. This is definitely the weakest Avengers movie. Proof that more characters, more like branches in the story does not necessarily equal a better movie. They obviously tried to follow up on what was done in the first Avengers, and it did not work. Individual moments are good. The story's weak overall. If it almost forgets the plot continuity and explanation throughout its own movie, because of that, it's coming in at C tier. Ant-Man. It's a pretty good movie. Unfortunately, it's a bit forgettable. We'll have the same problem with another movie later on. It's quite a good movie. It's just quite forgettable. Ant-Man as a character is quite forgettable. Paul Rudd is a great actor. It has an okay story, solid introduction for Ant-Man as a character. I don't have problems with it. I think, as I said, it's quite a good movie. Because of that, it's coming in probably B tier. Now we're on to Captain America 3. And again, like I said, the Captain America trilogy is brilliant. And this movie is amazing. Civil War. It has amazing storytelling, just like in The Winter Soldier. Provides a strong foundation for the future characters and the MCU itself. It's a concise story with believable conflict. The characters that were introduced in this movie, such as Black Panther, have better character and stronger character arcs in this movie than they do in their own movies. My only complaint is, and this isn't a complaint at Civil War, this is at the MCU as a whole and what they've chosen to do after that point, is I wish they would have shown the consequences of the movie. I wish they were better explored in later movies and latter movies, but that's besides the point. We're talking about this movie in itself, Civil War. I'm going to put it just below Winter Soldier, but it's like a toss-up at that point. I could go either way. Doctor Strange, as I mentioned, similar to Ant-Man, it's a solid movie, but it's kind of forgettable. This movie was, in terms of effects and CGI, this movie was brilliant. It's another movie introducing a flawed character who suffers as a consequence and is later redeemed. That kind of character arc is something that we're seeing less of in Marvel now in the MCU. But when you look back at these movies, you respect it a lot more. The villain plot balancing was poor because you had oh my god, can I remember? It's Dormammu, and then you had I want to say Caecilius. The fact that I don't even remember his name is shows the issue at hand. Again, what we're seeing with some of these B tier movies is the villain is one of the things that is letting the overall movie down. I'm going to put it just below Ant-Man. I think Ant-Man was the best movie overall. Guardians of the Galaxy 2. This is an interesting one within the Marvel fandom because a lot of people hate this movie. A lot of people don't think this was a good movie. I like this movie. I think it's a good movie. It's not as good as the previous one. It still has a clear story with an emotional payoff at the end. It's humorous at times, however. the humour is more forced than the first Guardians movie. But the further character exploration for Peter Quill, his relationship, his father, and with Yondu, I think it's a good movie. I think the story's clear enough. I don't agree with people. Some people say it's D tier. I don't. I'm going to put it at B, just below Captain America: The First Avenger. Spider-Man: Homecoming. Again, amongst Spider-Man fans, this is a contentious topic because some Spider-Man fans don't believe that this is, especially non-MCU Spider-Man fans, so fans of the comics, don't think this is a very good Spider-Man movie. I disagree. I think this is Tom Holland's best Spider-Man movie. I think it's better than No Way Home. It takes comic book elements and incorporates them well into a universe where Spider-Man has already been introduced. That's something that obviously the MCU chose to do, which differs to what obviously Sam Raimi did with his trilogy. Taking Spider-Man as a character who's already been introduced and putting him into and exploring his place in that universe. It's a clear storyline, good cast, sympathetic villain, a villain that villains don't all need some like convoluted plan to destroy or shape reality. That's, again, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but it's becoming more and more excessive in the MCU, and it's a repeated formula. If it's done well, it works. If it doesn't, it just doesn't blend well. But Vulture, I think, is a good villain. It's a very good Spider-Man movie. It's going to come in S tier for me. Probably 4 or 5 movies in S tier. Spider-Man: Homecoming will be one of the lower ones, but it's still up there. THOR: RAGNAROK. It's the best of the 4 movies. Storyline's much clearer than The Dark World. He uses comedy well. Chris Hemsworth, like I said, is more himself than Thor. I have an issue now, and this wasn't an issue before, and this is kind of, again, does it stand the test of time? Taika Waititi, when it comes to his directing of these movies, is a one-trick pony. What you're seeing now, the Marvel MCU humour, quote-unquote, is a result of, it was initiated by Taika Waititi in THOR: Ragnarok. And back then, obviously, when the movie came out, I could respect it as it was in itself, but because of the impact it's had on the genre and the impact it's had on its later Thor movie, Thor: Love and Thunder, whilst also the MCU as a whole, I have to critique the movie somewhat for that. Not a lot, it's not going to knock it down a lot, but it does have an effect in this ranking. It takes some responsibility, but overall the movie's good, so I think THOR: Ragnarok would take the top of the B tier list over the first Captain America. Black Panther. This is going to be probably the most controversial take. I thought it was an okay movie, and that's it. And I'll explain why. T'Challa is a shadow, as a character, he's a shadow of his Civil War portrayal. Like I said, his entry as an intimidating, composed character in the in Civil War, I was really excited to see how they expand on that character in his own movies. But the mystery surrounding his character is lost. I mean, he's constantly being saved by his suit and the magical herb. In these movies, in his own movies, he's basically, without those two things, he's useless for the most part. Wakanda's a confusing country in the sense that such a highly developed civilization resorts to such primitive means of government and succession. It's a very flawed system, and because of that, the villain plot and his plot to power to become the Black Panther feels contrived, but for that very reason. It's a very flawed system of government and succession. Super advanced equipment is used selectively at times, it's another contrivance. Killmonger's a poor villain overall with a ridiculous motive. His father was killed, so because of that he wants to kill hundreds of millions of people, including children, which he said that in his speech, if you go back to the movie. Yeah, so it's a flawed motive, ridiculous motive. CGI is ugly at times. The fight scene at the end between Killmonger and T'Challa and the riot on the train track, it looks really bad when you watch it back. Claw, again, another character who, when he was introduced in Avengers: Age of Ultron, had a very intimidating presence, but he's lost that. There are more issues with the movie that I haven't even referenced here, but the issue with this movie is there seems to be a stigma around it wherein people are reluctant to criticise due to a fear of people being called racist. I think it's ridiculous when you're critiquing a movie like this, you can't use terminology like that, especially when they can give you objective reasoning for why they don't think it's a very good movie. The movie had a good score, I'll give them that. Great fight choreography at times. The cast is solid. There's no complaints for that. The complaint I have is the script writing and the story narrative. So because of that, like I said, it's an okay movie. It'll come in C. It's not the bottom of C. We'll give it above. We'll put it above Iron Man 3. Again, I might do some shuffling at the end. However, after that movie came Infinity War. And Infinity War for me is the best MCU film. A lot of the fandom actually seem to take this stance as well. It's a perfect narrative switch between the locations. Obviously, you have the world building on Titan with Thanos. You have the Earth subplot with Wakanda. The switching between these locations and characters. All whilst the threat of Thanos is growing throughout the movie. It's a growing threat throughout the entire movie. The repercussions of the Sokovia Accords aren't forgotten in this movie. They are forgotten in later movies, and they're not held as strongly in other movies. And the movie takes time to explore the changing character relationships as a result of that. The result is a movie which deceives you. It gives you this false sense of security and growing confidence in our heroes, and because they're getting small victories throughout the duration of the movie until the crushing end sequence. And that end sequence is brilliant, and it's finalized with probably the best end scene in the franchise, the farm scene, I think it's called. And because of that, it is going to take my spot as the best MCU movie. Ant-Man 2. Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's a simple story with a weak villain. This Ghost, or what? I can't even remember her name. This is the worst and it's the most forgettable villain in the entire MCU. If you ask me to describe her plot motive, her motive, her aura around her, I wouldn't be able to tell you. Honestly, I have no idea. And the movie is pretty forgettable overall as well, but it does have good moments of action, and the end credits scene leads nicely into the events of Endgame. Not that that's going to come down to like a large portion of where I rank it, but it is nice to have an end credits scene that does link into Endgame. But overall, forgettable story, forgettable villain, and the movie is just average. Captain Marvel. This movie's bad. It treats the audience like children. It presents a ridiculously overpowered character with no flaws, no personality, and it's purely because of identity politics and the decision making behind this was the start of the death of the MCU. The slow death of the MCU began with this movie and with Brie Larson and her introduction and her portrayal of Captain Marvel in the MCU. They treat her like a pillar. They expect us to treat her as a pillar of the MCU. That's not going to be the case. The story and the plot are poor. The movie has no respect for what comes after it chronologically, and it attempts to alienate a whole group, men basically, by providing a poor example of toxic masculinity. I hate that term. It's used so poorly. But yeah, so this movie is, I would put it at D tier. Up next is Avengers Endgame. It continues on for the events of Infinity War excellently. The movie gives huge character payoff, and it makes up for the plot contrivances within the movie. Subjectively, this movie for me is like a 9 out of 10. Objectively, it's more like a 6 out of 10. But the payoffs, the character payoffs, like I said, make up for the many. And there are, especially regarding the whole time travel plot, there are many plot holes. But the final act's brilliant. It gives an iconic and euphoric ending to the Infinity Saga. Because of that, I will give it, I think I'm going to put it actually at the top of A tier. Spider-Man Far From Home. Narratively, this movie's a mess compared to Homecoming. Plot contrivances add to an already broken story, and another weak villain. It's okay. It's nowhere near as good as Homecoming. It's not as good as No Way Home. It's the weakest of the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, so I will put it at C tier. Now we have come to the almost cancerous phase of Marvel, Phase 4, which was a joke overall. And the first entry to that was a movie that wasn't even released in cinemas for what I remember. It was released straight to Disney+, Black Widow. World building's, first of all, we'll start with that. World building's nonsensical. Thematically, it's unstable. The plot's confusing. The plot armor that these characters have is crazy. This movie was a waste of potential, and it's almost an insult to Scarlett Johansson as an actress, because it should have been released either before or just after the first Avengers, and it deserved a competently written script. Basically, it's a disgrace. This movie was, and there were so many instances, crazy instances. One in particular is where they kill an entire prison population, guards, inmates. And it's just treated like, that's a passing moment. And this is becoming more and more common in Phase 4. It's where events like this occur and they're passed off, and people expect us to not even mention it or criticize it. It's worse than Captain Marvel. Up next we have Shang-Chi. This is one of the better movies in Phase 4. That's not a compliment. Let me just start by saying Shang-Chi, first of all, if we talk about the character as a street level hero, I think it was a 70s or 80s. It's a street fighter basically, and the movie should have been comprised of these elements. But like I said, the issue is now everything has to be bigger, everything has to be multiversal, making his plotline and his character arc intertwining that with a multiversal element is ridiculous. Katie, the side character, is annoying. It's almost insufferable at times. And the decisions made by the villain are frustrating. Again, Wenwu is a villain. He's a great actor, good character, annoying at times with the decisions he makes. However, saying that, the fight choreography is good, the musical score is good, and the villain is interesting in the sense that he's driven by love, not hate. That's something that we don't see very much in the MCU. It's a nice change. I just wish they could have perfected certain elements of it. Because of that, it's going to come in at C. Now we have our first E tier movie. Now this movie is it's bad. And I mean bad. There's far too many nothing characters, an awful plot, forgettable movie, and there's that giant celestial, by the way, that's still sticking out of the earth, that hasn't been mentioned. Apparently that's an Avengers base. They haven't even referenced that, they haven't even mentioned that. I honestly don't have anything more to say about this movie because my assessment of it is as empty as the movie is itself. It's a rubbish movie and there's no substance to it. There's nothing really more to talk about. It's an E tier movie. Up next, Spider-Man No Way Home. It's the movie for Spider-Man fans, similar to the Super Mario movie. It's for the fans. It's made for the fans, but this one, rather than the Mario movie, is objectively more sound. It's a good movie. It has plenty of nostalgia. It's a nostalgia-driven theme, essentially. It gives Tom Holland's Spider-Man an emotional arc in which he experiences great loss. It's consistently entertaining, with brilliant performances from the likes of Willem Dafoe. Andrew Garfield obviously has his redemption in this movie because he's brilliant. But the plot is contrived at some. It's a setup. The entire setup of events is heavily contrived, and that's what prevents it from being an S-tier movie. But the very fact that now Tom Holland's Spider-Man arc has been complete with him, he's finally experienced substantial loss on a personal level, which is what fueled the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man and the comic Spider-Mans. And if the fact that that's been experienced, it really gives like a sense of urgency and realism to his character and what his character is actually going to have to experience now as a superhero going forward. It's an A-tier movie. Following on from that is Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, and I'm going to come straight forward with this movie. I really hate it. From a subjective standpoint, I didn't enjoy it very much. From an objective standpoint, it is a mess. It didn't respect any of the stories that it built. It tried to balance so many elements within the movie and failed, and it seems unaffected by the events prior to it. I mean, Wanda's character, coming off from WandaVision, coming into the movies from WandaVision, it's just treated as it's nothing, it's meaningless, it doesn't mean anything. The movie introduced new mechanics that it can't itself grasp, but those mechanics will definitely have damning effects on future installments in the MCU. The plot mainly involves contrivances protecting characters from a villain who is unscalable. We don't know how to scale Scarlet Witch anymore in terms of power. Lucky and unlucky events happen one after another. Characters have even been assassinated or poorly established. I mean, this movie is a joke. There are so many. I think the main example I can give about just laziness within writing, and Sam Raimi as a director coming into it, he did what he could with a poor script. I have no doubts that without Sam Raimi it would have been even worse, and that's unimaginable. The main example I have of just lazy writing is the memory store scene. The idea that a projection of memories, that when you accidentally step onto this platform, it projects your memory, just a select memory to anyone walking past, as a way of avoiding dialogue or building scenes through themes of dialogue, through growth in dialogue. That's essential to a good story, is a good movie, is it has good dialogue. Removing that and just this lazy attempt of just the writers projecting their story through this memory store, it's ridiculous, and that's just one of many that I can name. I obviously don't have the drive, to be honest, to make a full breakdown of this. However, I would recommend the video made by Mauler, the YouTuber Mauler, in which I think it's like 5 hours and something, in which he breaks down the movie entirely. And I mean, it's 5 hours. That gives you a scale of how broken it is. So I would recommend that. I'll put the link in the description. But yeah, this movie is an E-tier movie. Up next is Thor Love and Thunder, and we're starting to see a trend in the Phase 4 movies. It demonstrates that Taika Waititi is a one-trick pony when it comes to directing these movies. It had potential to redeem Thor as a character, and give him the credit he's due. Chris Hemsworth in his portrayal of Thor, he deserves so much more, character-wise, but it's reducing him to a side character. I mean, think of his arc. He starts off as people describe him boring, then he becomes in Thor Ragnarok more like himself, but even then he's treated a little bit like a. It's not. Thor Ragnarok is actually one of the better movies in terms of for his character. But coming out of that into Infinity War, he again suffers great loss. But we're seeing a growth in character, in terms of like strength of character. It looks like now he's finally been giving his due, and we're getting a good Thor character. In an end game, it's treated off as a joke. Obviously, Fat Thor. When you watch it the first time, it's funny. When you watch it again, you realize, okay, I see what they're doing here. The fact that they break this character down and reduce him to a joke purely to scale and raise Captain Marvel, who is obviously the new most powerful Avenger, strongest Avenger, the apparent pillar of the MCU. We'll see how that works out in the box office for the Marvels. And then in Thor, Love and Thunder, they get him back into shape. You think his character's going to finally be strongly rooted and established, just as Iron Man was, just as Captain America was, but no, he's just treated as a joke. He's a side character, he's constantly screwing up everything he does. Female Thor's the main character in that movie. Obviously, he stands alongside her, a more competent and superior female counterpart. That's a shock, isn't it? The comedy's outdated and excessive. Underusing Christian Bale is criminal. They have Christian Bale in this movie. I think he has less screen time than Korg. Taika Waititi feels the need to add himself into the movie more than their star actor. Ultimately, the movie drowns in nonsensical plot themes, character interactions, and humour. And because of that, it's lower than Black Widow. I don't like this movie. Black Panther 2. Black Panther 2 inherits many of the problems from the first Black Panther, as well as suffering from the Phase 4 formula. It had a little bit of that Phase 4 zest added to it. The plot's an incoherent mess, the villain's motivation is laughable, thematically it's confusing, characters are either ambiguous or compromised, and the attempt at world building is not very thorough. Not very thorough at all. Additionally, there's no Black Panther, just Black Panther's sister at the end, Shuri, the end sequence of the movie. This was meant to be a tribute to Chadwick Boseman, but it just felt like a parasite feeding off this poor person. And it's disingenuous to him. The opening scene and the end credit scenes, which were genuine tributes, were good, but then throughout the movie, like I said, Black Panther as a character isn't shown until the very end sequence, and even then it's not the Black Panther that we wanted, it's Shuri. Black Panther will forever be Chadwick Boseman in the MCU. Now, obviously, Shuri is going to take the mantle, but it's not going to feel the same. I don't think it's going to work out. I didn't like this movie very much. It's better than Black Widow and Thor Love and Thunder. It's worse than Captain Marvel. Now we're on to Phase 5, Ant-Man Quantumania. Kicking off Phase 5 with a wet fart. Scott Lang is treated as selfish after helping save the universe by his insufferable activist daughter, her character. And what does she say to MODOK? Don't be a dick. Don't be a dick. That's her advice. That's the brilliant dialogue there from the showrunners and writers as usual. The plot stretches and contrivances in this movie are insane. The plot's just a sequence of disconnected events. It's just side quest event. This happens, then this happens, and this happens, but there's nothing in between. There's nothing bridging these events together. MODOK looks ridiculous, and Kang, who's meant to be the new... obviously, with recent news with Jonathan Majors, now they're in real trouble, but even before that, Kang, who was meant to be the big bad of the MCU, is a joke. He's already been killed twice. There's also a passing comment about people learning from ant socialism. That just showed that's a summation of the movie and the MCU as a whole now. That's dialogue in a movie. I can't say I'm surprised with the current culture, especially in Hollywood at the moment. I mean, look, what can I say? This movie sucks. For now, I put it above Eternals, but we'll see. And finally, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So earlier, when I said I loved all the Guardians movies, that was before this movie came out. I guess I had high hopes that James Gunn could finish off this trilogy with a bang, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. This movie was okay. I mean, compared to the Phase 4 sludge, it was great, but it isn't at the same level as the previous Guardians movies. There were parts of the movie that I liked, including some of the Rocket flashback scenes, but a lot of scenes were drowned out by prolonged jokes and forced humour. Adam Warlock's portrayal and presence in the movie was strange, to say the least. Several Guardians were sidelined in the film, and the movie lacked that chemistry between Gamora and Peter. Also, I love the music in these movies, but my god, there's a lot in this one. Sometimes I felt like it was used to cover up issues with the plot. The villain was good, and he's an actual villain, not the misunderstood female archetype we've gotten used to. This movie was much longer than it needed to be, and I'm sad to say that the parts I enjoyed aren't nearly as memorable as you'd expect from a Guardians movie. So I'm going to be putting this in the C tier. And this is my final tier list. As you can see, I've done a little bit of shuffling around. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, and turn on notifications so you don't miss content. I'm going to be working on some longer videos now, especially during the summer. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you in the next video.